Before we go forward to look at Stalin's rise in a little bit more detail, I think it's very important that we go back and look at how Stalin removed Trotsky, which and put a little bit more sort of detail into that. If you look at the spectrum that I've put on the slide, you'll see something that looks very, very similar. We did this when we looked at Hitler. And you've got the right wing and the left wing. And as I've said, the right wing, if you want a basic definition, if you're right wing, you believe in some sort of hierarchy. And if you're left wing, you believe in complete equality. So if you look at the far right, you've got groups like the Nazis, the NSDAP, the groups like the fascists who'd be classed as right wing. If you go towards the centre, then you'll see Boris Johnson and the current British government. And we could debate whereabouts in the centre they are. I would argue because Britain and the West have got a very large focus on equality, I would argue that Britain is centre left rather than centre right. But like I said, that's debatable. But then you've got on the far left, you've got communism. And Russia in the 1920s was in its socialist state. It was under one government, the communist government, which meant all of the politicians were left wing. However, there are different levels of left wing, and especially different wings of communism. And in Russia in the 1920s, you had three main branches of communism. The first ones were the extreme lefts, so the ones that were the furthest left on this spectrum. And as you can see on the left-hand side, Trotsky is an example of a far left-wing communist. But then you've got what are called centralists, people who are in the centre of communism's split. And Stalin is a good example of that. These people in the centre, they have some Trotsky ideas, but some right-wing ideas as well. So centre is a little bit of both. And then right-wing communists are men like Bukharin, who we'll get into a little bit more next slide. As this is a communist country, Bukharin, Stalin, and Trotsky, from left, right, and centre, they all believe in equality and sharing wealth, redistributing money and resources. However, the far left, people like Trotsky, they believed in complete Marxism. And what that meant is no private ownership whatsoever. The wealthy should be forced to give up all of their money so it could be redistributed. Wealthy farmers, a group called the kulaks, should be forced to give up all their food and money. And that Russia should not have any borders. And that again feeds into that idea of a world revolution, that communism is an idea of the world rather than one country. In comparison, people like Bukharin, who class themselves as right-wing communists, they believe that some of these ideas, one of them in particular, like giving the kulaks, who were the wealthy farmers, no money whatsoever to keep for themselves, he felt that was a bad idea because kulaks will then start hoarding food, which will make the country start starving. It will affect the economy. So what Bukharin said is, fine, let's tax heavily, let's redistribute wealth, but let's allow some people to have a little bit of extra money if they work hard. So it is a communist idea, but it's not as extreme as Trotsky. And this battle happened across the 1920s, from 1922 to 1927. The left wing and the right wing of the communists were kind of in a bit of a competition. How should the kulaks be treated? Should they have borders? How should it speak to other countries? How should wealth be distributed? And it started to look like it was a battle between Trotsky and Bukharin, with kind of Stalin in the middle, not liking Trotsky or Bukharin. But what Stalin did was a very, very clever move. Instead of challenging both Bukharin and Trotsky at the same time, Stalin decided it would be best to pick one person to join sides with that person to defeat the other. And as you remember what we were saying in our last lesson, Trotsky was the biggest threat to Stalin. So Stalin decided to side with Bukharin. And what started to happen is every time that Trotsky and Bukharin had an argument in government, Stalin would ask all of his loyal supporters to support Bukharin, which then started to withdraw the power of Trotsky more and more every year. And by 1927, Trotsky was essentially on his way out. And this was a beautiful strategy. It's a lot like 1066 with the three contenders with the throne, and Harold Godwinson had to fight two people instead of William, who had to fight one. Trotsky had to fight Bukharin and Stalin, where Stalin was only fighting Trotsky from 22 to 27. And it worked. 1929, Trotsky is well out of Russia. He's been exiled. But Stalin's got a brand new problem, and that is the fact that Bukharin has now become a very powerful man in the Russian government, and some people start to see him as perhaps the leader of the Soviet Union and Soviet Russia.